Do South African university students feel entitled to higher education? Should students who can afford to pay fees benefit from the Fees Must Fall campaign? We know that government has committed an additional 2 billion rand towards funding higher education. The question is it enough? Today we're discussing this as students recently reclaimed South Africa's economic space in what was considered a coup. We're asking, is it right if fees? And if you want to tweet us and join the conversation, you can do that at CNBC Africa using the hashtag YoungMoney410. And of course, the special hashtag for this episode, which is hashtag #ZerightIfFees. Welcome to tag me at The Real Nosy. So today I got an opportunity to go to Wits University and to interact with some of the students to get their opinion of what has been dubbed the revolution. Here is just one of the voices speaking on the back of the court case that they were fighting today. You have this victory as part of the milestone. What now?
We continue with protest action, and the first thing that must happen is that we need to claim back our home, Solomon House, and then from then onwards, we continue as planned. Our protest will continue being peaceful. Our protest will continue echoing what other universities are saying nationwide, that fees must fall and we want free education now.
So if one looks around campus, there's a lot of activity going on. Some people are registering. The numbers seem to be much smaller than what we saw last year. Is this an indication of waning support for the campaign?
I don't think so. A lot of people that are here registering physically are first-year students. So I think that it is on us as Fees Must Fall, and we have started. We need to conscientize them, we need to mobilize them, because a lot of students are still at home. Registration that is going on this week is only for first years, and then registration for other years will happen online also, but then in the next coming weeks. So what is happening now, or what we are planning to do now, we've printed out our demands in all African languages, and we're going to distribute them, and we're going to mobilize as much as we can so that we conscientize these people, so that as they come into Wits, they also form part of the movement.
And what happens then if people choose just to continue with the status quo, to register and to pay their fees? Are you going to be opposing any of that action, and if so, how?
Honestly, to answer you, Fees Must Fall is all about education. We do want people to register. We do want people to go back to class. In fact, we also want to go back to class, but we will not go back to class up until free education is attained. So what we are saying is that give us free education so that we can do what we all want to do. So we are not in opposing sides with anyone that wants to register. We also have that view. However, we are saying, can there be more inclusion of especially the poor people, and also the missing gap, which is like the middle class, which is not fairly represented.
And as a final question, we're seeing a police presence or security presence. What has been the engagement and interaction with them thus far?
Basically, from court, we came here and we asked them, we come from court and we want our place. We lost the case, we need to reclaim our place back. And they said, we haven't been informed, so just wait till we talk to management, and then we will engage further with you. We waited peacefully, as we are still peaceful even now. And before we knew it, they were pushing us down, they were being violent to us. No one explained anything. They just said, wait, management is coming to address you. So we were doing as instructed. Next thing we know, we are being violated in the way that we have been violated. But then we still stand and say, we're not moving. We don't have accommodation. We don't have... Solomon was our home, so we were not moving. We're going to stay here. If it means staying the whole night, we're going to stay here till management addresses us.
And joining me now for this conversation is Jamie Mighty. He is the president of the South African Universities Debating Council. I'm also joined by Tammy Prusent. He is an activist. Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng. She is the vice principal of research and innovation, and this at the University of South Africa. And Tato Silibi. He is project director at the Tutuka Bursary Fund, also responsible for transformation and growth. Welcome, and thank you for making that time to be here with me today. Khethi, we've heard the students quite emotional, of course, on the back of a court case, but maybe let's just get a sense, as South African citizens who are perhaps not at the forefront of this conversation, where is the Fees Must Fall campaign now? Do we have a sense of where we are as a country and whether we're a step closer to seeing that realization or still quite far off?
I mean, I think I would like us to start at the beginning to say what's the debate really about. And for me, there's two strands to this debate. On the one hand is the debate about affordability of higher education, and on the other hand is about the complexities or the problematics of commodifying higher education. All right, so and unfortunately, when you in the Fees Must Fall movement group, there isn't much conversation. Some people, when they talk about it, they talk about affordability. So people are happy to say, well, let NSFAS come to the fore and let money be available for the poor, make it affordable. So in that debate, it means that it is okay that other people can pay. You make it accessible for the poor, but those who can afford should pay. The commodification debate, however, says education should not be commodified. It must be free for everyone. It is irrelevant whether you can afford or not. And for me, these are ideological differences. Yes. And they should be taken into consideration in the debate. Unfortunately, at the moment, they're not.
Who should be leading the debate, though?
I mean, I think these debates should be taking place at universities. I mean, at UNISA, we have that debate during the first week of March. We've set up a debate on a vice chancellor speaking and students speaking, and we've entitled it the rise and fall of higher education, because I think we've got to handle this debate sensitively in this way, because in fact this could signal either the rise of public higher education or the fall of public higher education. Okay, and I'm saying that because depending on how we handle it, we run a risk of creating a situation where you get private higher education emerging. Right. And then you have what you have in basic education. You have a parallel system, you have a public education system, and you have a private system. We don't have a strong private higher education system in the country, because our public higher education is very strong. And in fact, that's where you get excellent higher education. But in basic education, we've got strong private basic education. You've got the two. So that's why I'm saying the debate is important to handle it at that level of what's really. Where does this call for higher education? What's driving it? Is it affordability to make accessible, or is it about commodification? So
you raise a number of very, very important points, and I think we're just going to try and pick some of them. And maybe, Jamie, let me bring you in for your comments. And as we think about that, I want us to think about that distinction between a private good and a public good. And constitutionally, how have we positioned public goods? And does this give the students a stronger case? Jamie?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Mamkheti about the differences around the costing of university. But I think if you've been observing in the past year, there's multiple strains. And I think it's becoming more difficult to see who's who in the conversation. Yeah. Because people are calling for nuanced differences. For example, SASCO released a call yesterday talking about access must rise. So if you look at the university system, I think you've got to look at it from registration all the way to graduation. So the question of access is one of how easy is it for the underprivileged to get into university? One of the elements of it is a preparation element. Yes. How adequately prepared are the students coming through from the primary school situation into our universities? Because the reality is, for degrees such as BSc or engineering, the people who got that graduate acceptance, who get into the university, you have a dropout rate in the first year of about 70% in engineering. So there's those people who get in and have a false start. And we need to have a conversation about that as well.
Absolutely, because the conversation actually also takes us to funding for failure, because we've got issues such as underfunding where it doesn't really matter. And maybe let me bring you in at this point in Tato, because you're part of a very big conversation around enabling access. And maybe you can just pick up on what Jamie has raised. Are we funding adequately and sufficiently to at least support success of students as much as possible?
I think with what Prof said, this conversation is multifaceted, because You can have all the money in the world, to Jamie's point, if you can fund all the students, but if you're not getting the throughput that you need, you have a problem. And to the extent that the challenges that current students are facing is on the back of the fact that they've been the few that have managed to make it there and now find barriers to their throughput not being their academic ability or the strengths of their intelligence, etc. I think funding is there, but it needs to be smart funding.
Yeah.
It needs to be funding that holds students to account. It needs to be funding that holds universities to account. And I think by and large, what the Tutuka Bursary Fund has managed to do is to say, given the challenges of our country, we're all responsible for making sure that those who do come with gaps from basic education aren't left out in the cold, because you're perpetuating the cycle that we come with from the days of apartheid.
And Tatu, let me follow up, especially because you make the point around the fact that there is money and that funding is there. Are we funding the right strata? Because there's been a lot of conversation about the missing middle and the gap in the center. How are we addressing that as a country?
And we're definitely not funding all the stratas. And the question is whether the students who can afford should pay. I think goes back to the point that we do need to have a conversation about, is it public education, even at higher education level?
Yes.
Or is it education for those who can afford? So to that extent, for me, the missing middle is where I think we got it wrong.
Yeah.
South Africa had I'm not sure if that actually is the truth, but we supposedly experienced a big boom within the black community of black diamonds, and we now had a nice little middle class, but I'm not sure if that middle class is what middle class is really all about, because you still have a lot of parents families with two parents working, and yet they cannot afford to send their children to university. So our model has not taken that into consideration. It took the old system the way it was, that you really needed to be able to afford, and continued with it, even though your profile of the student coming into university changed. And by and large, many of our universities that formerly catered to white students are now predominantly black, yet the model remains as if those students are coming from the same backgrounds.
So a number of issues that we're going to get to, exposing the fragility of this thing that we're calling the black middle class. And I also think we need to ask the question, what does it take to run a university? And we need to get back to that. But Tami, I want to bring your voice in and just get a sense of, as an activist, how are you reading these conversations? What are, for you, the burning issues and questions that we should be thinking about as we try to make sense of this as a country?
If you look at it from point of just funding, funding is going to have to come from somewhere. I know you said that we do have the money, but currently as we speak, we are technically bankrupt. So how do you find the money? Do you find creative solutions to raise the money? Do you hold like the kids responsible? Do something like Umkanda where kids do, Umkanda in Rwanda where kids do social responsibility or social work every Friday, every month, or like Botswana we do Letsema, or Cuba where we get kids involved, so it's not free education, actually working towards it in some way or another. So in a global, bigger space of Africa, the continent is like an Africa Spring, like I like to say, or is this part of like a true students movement where fees is the only thing that's been looked at?
But here's the thing. I mean, I think Tami's right. Where does the money come from? I mean, I think one of the things that we are not talking about in the country, we've got lots of scholarships, and scholarships. The way scholarships are constructed in South Africa, they're about recognition and not about need. Okay, so they're about recognition of excellence. So what you get is that, in fact, the children who win the top scholarships in the country are in fact children of the rich, because they go to good schools, they will get good grades. They're my son, my daughter, because they sleep in the same house with professors and accountants and so on. And so they get fully funded when they get to university, and then they boast about, I'm such and such, I've got an Alan Gray scholarship, or I've got an Laurie Dippenaar. Okay, and I'm saying part of this conversation of funding higher education that we should get to is change the discourse around scholarships. I think that's the first step that we can do, just to start with that.
Mtato, you've got to come in.
Because and here's the thing, before Mtato comes in, here's the thing. I mean, what you have when SAICA funds my son or a son, I'm even not there. I mean, a son of a billionaire to become a CA. A billionaire who may be black, by the way, all right? And what the billionaire does is that they buy their son a BMW.
Yes.
All right, because their fees are fully paid.
Right.
And then you've got a son of a gardener who also wants to be a CA, but they've got 68% for accounting and maybe 75% for mathematics. They don't really make it into the SAICA cut or whatever because it's so competitive. And then they end up with what? With nothing. And those are the students hustling on Facebook for scholarship. And so I'm saying we've got to change that discourse and have corporates starting to say, our bursary, of course we want to recognize excellence, but it must be excellence within the context of need. If you are excellent and can afford, you don't get it.
So academic excellence over need.
And that's where I think we got it right 12 years ago as the Tutuka Bursary Fund. Our balance is exactly that. We do need academic excellence because universities have standards and we can't create our own in terms of admission for our profession. So if the universities say this is the caliber of student we need, we first look for that. The second aspect that we look for is need. We do have a threshold that we look for, that parents making a certain, or families making an income about a certain amount, we can't fund that student. That student whose parents are well off and can afford, no matter how many distinctions they come with, we can't assist them. Because our challenge, particularly within our profession, is to make sure that there's not only access, but there's transformation, and transformation across the board.
Let me open up a little bit.
That's Tutuka.
That's Tutuka,
Yes,
and I think that's the point,
That's
because it's not reflective of the broader picture of higher education funding. And maybe, Tammy, let me bring your thought in here. Oftentimes we hear of students with multiple bursaries and multiple scholarships, and it's the same students who've gone to great schools and therefore have gotten great grades. Again, I come back to the question that I think Tato touches on. Are we funding the right way? Is our funding model looking at need over excellence, and not just to use the Tutuka example as a proxy for the bigger picture, because clearly there seems to be a bit of a disconnect in that space.
Or do you call it Cuba? Is it like, it's a free education for everybody, you know? And then once kids come through and can't get a way out. I was studying a while ago when I was still at Pretoria University with the fund, there's a high number of girls actually paying through schools through prostitution. So we look at like food, accommodation, all these things that we don't look at. So maybe just getting in is fine, but then how, like you're saying, how do the kids survive once they're in?
Jamie, I love the fact that you've raised that, because I want to come back to, you started speaking to us around throughput, and I think Tato picked up on that as well. But we know that universities, or some of them, have dropped registration and saying, well, now this is a way that we're enabling access. I'm not convinced that dropping registration is a real sustainable way of granting access, because if the funding is not sufficient in the pipeline, we might as well not have started.
Look, I think just to address some of the funding things, I think definitely there needs to be, if people want to honor high achievers, give them an award. Say Alan Gray recognizes you, awards you this prestigious award. You can walk around saying, I'm an Alan Gray scholar, but you don't get the money.
Or the Golden Key Society,
just
whatever
similar
it is,
to
right?
that. Because, I mean, maybe some people don't want Golden Key, they want Alan Gray or Mandela Rhodes.
Absolutely.
But in those cases where your father is a prominent politician and can afford to send you to Oxford himself, you know, don't take that money and don't become a beneficiary of a system when you live in Sandton and you use Uber and you have an iPhone 6S and your iPad. So I think that's one of the funding streams. I think the other thing we've got to have an honest conversation with the South Africans is there's a lot of leakage of money in government. I mean, it's close to 70 billion in some years. There's a lot of people who don't have clean audits. There's a lot of crime going on there. And if the state and the custodians of the youth are really serious about funding education, that's one of the first sources you've got to go to for the money. To say, hey guys, people have been dipping into the coffers too much. The students now need something. You know, if at some level you want to be diplomatic, just to say, guys, cut it back. You know, cut it back. Let's have some left for the kids. But if you're really going to be Singaporean about it, you've got to actually have some draconian measures for the people who are pilfering from the already present resources. There are other platforms, though, of revenue collection. For example, Mexico introduced a tax on fizzy drinks, you know, because that's a big industry that does. South Africa is the second largest consumer of fizzy drinks in the world after Mexico, and we don't impose an excise tax on fizzy drinks, even though we know that we've got an obesity problem. So Coca-Cola and other corporations get away with cheap tax in Africa, when in other states they're held to a higher standard. That could be a source of revenue. So it's not just one platform. But to discuss now the question you just asked, do we drop the standards of entrance? I don't necessarily think that's the issue, because what happens right now is WITS will take 7,000 brilliant South Africans out of 70,000 applicants. And out of that 7,000, only 1,600 graduate on time. 48%, if you read the Council of Higher Education report, never ever graduate from anything. They just drop out. Right now, we've got to have a serious conversation about where is WITS and the government, or UCT, or Rhodes, or whoever else. Where are they going wrong? Because these are brilliant kids. These are the kids who were in newspaper articles. What happened to them? You know, there has been now in the townships again. You once got a high mark in matric, but you never graduated from where you went. Or some of them game the system. First year at WITS, first year at UJ, first year at UCT. So NSFAS pays 3 or 4 times for the same guy. And I think what happens in the first instance, extended programs have been proven to be more effective than the normal time. So what happens with extended programs, they used to have one in WITS for the Bachelor of Science, that had an over 60% throughput. Do you understand what I mean? Because they took the time to do the remedial work. And it's unfortunate because people are coming through without the appropriate skills. But they took the time to do the remedial work, to teach you what you ought to have learnt whilst you were in high school, so that you can compete with the kid who went to Kingsmead or Rodin or St. John's, because they are ahead of you when you get to first year Bachelor of Science. They are ahead of you when you get to first year BA. And sometimes you need to catch up. And what we're seeing is that instead of rolling out more extended programs for the kids who are on those cutoff line marks, because it's predictive, you know, they can predict with a high probability who's going to graduate based on their marks on the matric. Those people who don't have a high probability, put them in extended programs, but further, give them the support that they need whilst they're in school.
And that opens up the conversation. Unfortunately, we're almost at the end of the first half, but before we go to break, we did reach out to the social sphere, social media platforms in particular, and we posed a few questions to you. And here's a couple of your responses. The question that we asked you was, should students who can afford to pay fees benefit from the Fees Must Fall campaign? And we asked you to bring your voices into this conversation, and a lot of you did. And let's pull up some of those tweets. Gabatra Zete says, I would suggest as a start and test for those who went to private schools to pay and free government for government school grades. Again, a conversation for us to think about. We do have a second voice that's coming on this particular one. And Gilbatra again comes back and says, you know, Nozi, that's a tricky question, as families would first have to pass a means test. I thought we were already doing means tests, especially when it comes to platforms like the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, or are we not getting those right?
We are running means tests, and I think you're right, NSFAS does run that, but I think the situation is so desperate, can you trust the information you're receiving with regards to the means? And does NSFAS have the capacity really to do the kind of background checks that should be done? Because if you happen to have, if I have my son, I'm not married to his mother, my oldest son, he can use his mother's surname and his grandmother's address to apply for NSFAS.
Do you have confidence then that if we're saying we're going to be putting in an additional 2 billion rand into the NSFAS system, that that's the right move?
I think the question for me has always been the system as it stands right now of funding. Doesn't matter how many billions, in my view, you put in. Have you cleaned up the system? Jamie raised the point that there are students who will get funding 4 times because they've moved around universities. Is that up to scratch? Is the information that NSFAS has in terms of SARS and all of that, is that up to scratch? So there's a complex web underneath. But first and foremost, the funding issue around, is it public education or is it private education, in the sense that those who can afford are the ones who have access.
And we're back to one of the points you made in the very opening statements, public education versus private education. We're going to go to break on this point as well. When we come back, we're going to pick up on it and a lot of the issues that the panelists have put on the table. Welcome back to this special Young Money debate. We are zooming into the Fees Must Fall campaign. It's January 2016 and the campaign is being put to the test as universities continue or find themselves unable to continue with their registration process. Earlier today, I went out to Wits University. I did catch up with the spokesperson for the institution, and this was on the back of the court case that they had running today. Her name is Sharona Patel, and this is what she had to say. We know that no conversation is ever complete without both sides of the story. So now we're speaking to the Wits spokesperson. Her name is Sharona Patel. Sharona, thank you for making the time to join us. We've heard from the students, especially those that had been in court this morning. Just give us a sense of where does the university stand right now in terms of the Fees Must Fall campaign?
Okay, at this stage, all we can say is that we support the call for access to affordable, quality, free education. At this stage, we're doing all that we can to ensure that we give as much access as we can to students. We've scrapped the registration fee, we've scrapped the upfront payment. The first installments that students have to pay would be at the end of March. We're saying that if students still cannot pay at the end of March, that they should enter into a payment plan with the university. Now, I cannot comment for the students. I know that they're calling for free education now, and we believe that's a national conversation. That's something that should be a national imperative for both government and the private sector.
Has what's been happening on campus and some of the initiatives that you say the university has taken impacted on the registration numbers at all?
We haven't seen a major impact on registration numbers. However, our registration process was disrupted on Monday. We also did not have face-to-face registration on Tuesday. We have continued with online and telephonic registration throughout the week and face-to-face registration on Wednesday, Thursday and Friday.
Do you have a sense of whether students broadly are likely to be accepting of the plan that you're proposing in terms of delayed payments and payment plans?
Okay, well, it's something we're doing to grant as much access as we can to higher education. However, some students feel that this is obviously not enough, and as we're saying, we support the students in their call. The issue is where do we get the funds and the resources to pay for it. We are happy to stand with the students, to go to the public and private sectors to see how we can fund this.
And still with me, my guest, Jamie Mighty. He is the president of the South African Universities Debating Council, Tammy Present, an activist. Professor Momokgethi Phakeng, Vice Principal of Research and Innovation, this at the University of South Africa, and Tato Silibi, Project Director at the Tutuga Bursary Fund, also responsible for transformation and growth. And Tato, one of the things that Sharona said was that this is a national conversation. How do you react to that? Does that make sense? Is this a national conversation? And who should be shaping the conversation?
And I think that's been part of the problem. I don't think it is a national conversation. I think it's a conversation in the quarters that are most directly at the moment impacted by the campaign. The announcement of the 0% fee increase last year was almost a directive from government to universities. It wasn't universities coming together and saying, this is possible. If anything, we heard the contrary to the issue that there could be any freezing of increases or no increases at all. So I think our communities, the parents in the townships, in town halls, those conversations aren't, this is not happening. It's a by the way when it happens to be on television or on radio. So for me, I think that's important that it needs to be taken down to that level so that we understand I may have to make sacrifices as a working South African to make sure that there is free public education. I might have to incur a higher bit of a tax. I don't know, but we need, as South Africans in general, need to be engaged in a conversation. And right now, universities with autonomy and their rights to be able to do what they do in terms of figuring out how universities work, and government, on the other hand, trying to have this balancing act. It's almost a one-sided kind of conversation, and I think that's why there was such a shock last year when students stood up and said, we're not going to listen anymore.
What does this mean for your business model as a bursar? If the campaign is successful and higher education is suddenly free in South Africa, does this mean that you cease to exist?
aim to cease to exist. It is our goal as a bursary fund to aim to cease to exist, because we're not in it for ourselves. We're in it in the development of the country, to grow the scarce skills, to make sure that the cycles of poverty, particularly in African and colored communities, is broken. So that's what we work for. That's what we live for. I'd be happy tomorrow if I'm out of a job. I gotta go look for something else, because that's where we should be.
Okay, let me put it to you that I don't necessarily think you will stop to exist, because if we get free higher education, I mean, at the moment in Tati, we don't have enough universities to accommodate all the students.
True.
And as I said earlier, you are going to have private higher education coming up. It's going to be strong. Of course, you already have Monash, that's charges higher. That's got no fees must fall, and things are going on. You're going to have more, and I'm sure as we're speaking, the Advertex and the Kuros are talking about their higher education. Some of them are already running teacher education programs, colleges, and so on, and they're looking to expand. You're going to have that. You're going to have more students wanting to gain access to higher education, and the private higher education institutions will be charging more.
Should we be encouraging that though? Because we do need more.
What can you do? You can't. In a way, you can't outlaw it.
There's also option for like open universities, like Coursera, where you can do your online. Is there space for that going to come once the data is more freely available?
That's
not going to happen here. People don't have ADSL.
Yeah.
But if it comes to 20 wants to be a free Wi-Fi type city,
I don't think.
But how long will it take for us to get there?
Guys, I think the reality is, and I think we need to consider this. Firstly, this debate that Mam Kheti has identified is one we need to seriously think about, because if you go to universities in Nigeria, you will see that they do have, like in the state of Owerri, there's a free university there that only has 4 functional toilets. So when you go to the university, it's free, but it looks like a dilapidated school. So you've got to also think about those modalities around what is the nature of the free education that we want, and how do we sustain the right quality. I mean, I see that there's a lot of online learning now, you know, the MOOCs, the massive online learning platforms. But you must remember, like, it doesn't seem to me that ADSL is going to become readily available to the kind of kid who could want to learn Think Again course.
Sam is getting upset. Sam is getting upset.
I'm just being realistic, because if I'm in Soweto, where do I even get the iPhone to begin with for me to register and do those things?
I mean, phones the way they're growing now, it's possible. You can download a textbook. There are free textbooks on Creative Commons. Why are we still buying textbooks if you can get them for free from the all same universities? So you can download those, small one PDF, have it on your phone, and it's not that expensive.
Here's the thing: the demand for higher education is so high. Yeah. So I work at an open distance learning university, and I can tell you, with more than 350,000 students, the majority of those, even though you have everything online, they still want face-to-face. Sometimes they they want a rugby, they want a soccer field on the.
That's why
because
that's so hard as well. Because
what I'm saying is that what you're talking about is an ideal, and some people will access that. It might be employed people who could be going to UNISA, they go for Coursera or whatever. But you're gonna have the demand is high, so. I bet, talk to me in 10 years from now, private higher education will be thriving.
But I think
and Tati will be in business. Because let me tell you what you'll be doing. Let me tell you what Tati will be doing.
What will I be doing?
Tati will be sponsoring some of the black students
in the private
to go to the private university to BCS. He doesn't think about it right now, but it is going to happen.
For me, though, I think
defend yourself.
I don't need to really, because I think for the most part of our model speaks to the fact that it's not just funding isolated. It's funding coupled with throughput at the end. How do you get that throughput? You can get the student there, but you need to provide the kind of support to enable that student to get through. So for me, even if we say free education, we know nothing in this world is for free. Somebody is paying for it. It might not be that student. Therefore, the one aspect of what we do will still be very relevant, ensuring that those students that come in continue to study and graduate.
But Jamie's point is apt here. Because what Jamie's saying is once you go free, money is not enough. And look, our experience with basic education in the country, because with we don't have free basic education in the country, by the way. We have non-fee paying schools. You should talk to them about what changed when the paying of fees happened. Many of them are struggling, okay, because as much as they get a government subsidy, it's not enough. So it's going to happen at universities. It will never be enough. And then, you know, and what you'll have, the universities will start cutting. What will they cut? Toilets or support for students? And so the private higher education sector will thrive because they will have all the rights to charge. Unless there are laws that prevent them from charging up to a particular amount, and so and then they will charge. And when they charge, they will hire the best academics. They will get the best support. Ntati will love them because if Ntati takes his students to them, they will be well supported. They'll complete on time. And I'm just saying, you've got to think of this possibility.
Or is it time for our students now to take some of the slack from the universities? Like at school, we used to clean the toilets. We didn't have help. So in terms of like admin, should students now take up more help?
But the culture of our country, the values have changed.
Let me just
Students don't even want to clean
toilets. We clean
primary
toilets
school kids and high school kids don't want to clean the classrooms anymore.
But if they want free fees, there must be a way to help
Exactly.
the burden
So there's a
from-
lot of ideology in what we're talking about,
let
Jamie.
me jump in. I'm a Zimbabwean national, actually. And when I came here, I wanted to be a medical student. I got accepted to Wits Medical School. And the reason why I never really wanted to study medicine at the university in Zimbabwe is because the conditions there were so dire. You know, so state administration of public institutions does have a bearing on what kind of talent you retain and who you attract. But further than that, I think we also must discuss, because like it's a multifaceted conversation, and it would be remiss of me not to add as a student that genuinely speaking, the educational system is not even preparing us for the Africa we want to create. If I go now to law school, I'm being taught, and that's where I am currently in law school, I'm being taught how to be a good lawyer for one of the top law firms. I'm not being taught how to build a law firm or how to provide legal services to the communities that need it. So you look at me, you see an articulate black man who is studying law. Your expectation is he is going to do wonderful things for his people, right? But I'm not even equipped to know the basics. I should leave varsity knowing how to get a startup law firm running in the communities that need it, because that's what you do in entrepreneurship, and this is an entrepreneurship show. I should be able to identify opportunity, go to those locations where the opportunity exists, and build my customer base.
But Jamie, who's supposed to make that happen? I think that's where
I
for
think
me
we're
the
supposed
challenge
to
is.
demand it, because it's not happening, right? So what's happening is that the state, and last year we saw that the state is a reactive state. You wait for students to block the gates, and then all of a sudden you find 2 billion. Because the reality is, if you go to film school, you're not being taught the business of film. You're just being taught, here's the various media platforms, here's how you write a plot.
But that's not the problem of the states.
No,
That's the
I'm saying it's a
problem of the
collective.
universities.
It's a collective
And
effort,
you
right?
see, that's where autonomy comes. The government doesn't tell universities what to teach, how to teach.
I think it's a collective.
Universities, well, it's a collective, but Jamie,
At a very
in
removed
academia,
level.
disciplines regulate themselves. And so the challenge is with, I think it would be a sad day to say government must.
Well, I'm not.
We need to be challenging that, and I agree with you, and I think that has to be raised, and if it's raised by students, it's even.
And this is what students are not, from what I'm seeing, they're not picking a role player who is messed up. Students are setting the standard. I think currently what's most vocal is the question of the fees. But I want to just highlight that it's not the only question, right? Because if you think about it, it's access must rise, roads must fall. I'm even willing to put in the graduations must rise. But further than that, we need to, outsourcing must end. But further than that, we need to actually become economic players.
Let's get into the outsourcing conversation. You're with an institution. Let me ask a very simple question. What does it take to run a university?
What do you mean?
So I want to bring into context the conversation that's happening around outsourcing, juxtaposition that against the students saying fees must fall. Where do we find the middle? And can we still run public institutions with that kind of narrative and thinking?
The truth of the matter is, with outsourcing, universities are saving money. They are not spending as much money as they would have been if they were hiring the staff themselves. Okay, but of course, beyond that, the outsourcing companies are exploiting the people, because as much as we don't hire them, we don't give them pensions, we don't care about their medical fees and so medical funds and so on. They are paid salaries by their companies. Their companies don't do that either. Okay, and that's another debate. And it's unfortunate that of course, the students are challenging universities to say, well, stop the practice so that these people get a fair deal. But in fact, if we stop the practice, then we need more money to hire, if you want to hire the same number of people and give them 10,000 rands per month as the students are demanding. And I'm sure there's no vice chancellor. I mean, many of the vice chancellors in this country are activists, are former activists themselves. Every vice chancellor would agree that, you know, they are exploited by their employers. But these people are not employed by universities, they're exploited. But can we afford to hire them? Is it feasible? Can we afford to pay them? So it connects to this. So we're asking for fees must fall. So the principle of not abusing workers, we all agree on. How we do that is a challenge, because if fees fall, universities don't make money.
The
Of course,
pricing
of course.
pricing model is wrong
for the labor to run the university.
Well, for our country.
For our country, exactly.
As we are as a country, with the limited number of universities that we have, given our population and given the skills that we need and all of that, it means the pricing model is wrong if the universities cannot do anything else other than look at a model where they save money via outsourcing. If that's the case, then we're definitely not pricing it properly.
And remember,
correctly.
it wasn't always there, by the way. It's something that started in the 90s. Some universities that started in the 90s.
Some kids whose parents were working on staff could go to vets. So it's also benefits also they've lost from.
But
universities started things because it was costly, and they started saying, how do we save money? Where do we get extra money?
But if education is going faster, inflation or faster than inflation, then where's the money? Where's the leakage? Because all of a sudden there's these new things that have been done before, or did you change the whole entire country system for it to work? Or is education just like a tip of the iceberg? For it to work, we need to change the entire country how it works. Education, or the funding model,
the pricing model that Untitled speaks about, do we need to turn it on its head in order for it to work? Or are there incremental changes that can be made at the edges? What do we need to do?
We do need, in my view, to honestly have honest, rough, painful conversations around our education system, from basic education all the way through, because it's interconnected. If there is a whole lot of money that's being thrown at basic education, yet we see the results that we see. And those that do come in, 70% of the students that go into engineering don't come through. It makes absolutely no sense.
But it's an efficiency problem. I don't understand, because we have been highlighting at a policy level early childhood development for the longest time, investing in education for the longest time. If you look at how the budget is allocated, there is money going into education. But where's the money going?
Where in education is it going?
But surely basic education is receiving their fair share of the funds.
And the results for basic education, where so many kids are dropping out before they even get to matric. So, I mean, like...
No, but let's wait. I mean, it's easy to challenge and critique basic education. There's much more failure in higher education.
That's true.
So failure in education in this country is across the board.
Should it go back to being one department?
No, I'm not saying one that will solve the problem. I'm just saying, you know, let's not throw, because you speak to high school kids, teachers, they say this is the primary. University lecture says it's...
I think
so
I have
you have a solution?
Not a solution, but a contribution, because I've seen multiple countries, you know, being a foreign national, you're exposed to more. So I'll tell you one thing. Zimbabwe has nowhere close to the South African budget on education at all. But the basic education there is incredibly better. I'm willing to bet money on that.
What's the secret sauce?
So there's no real thing called secret sauce, right? But the reality is, firstly, there is a real expectation on students to succeed. Here, there is no real expectation, because you've got to look at the messaging you give kids. And kids are not stupid. And if I come into the class and you tell me, hey, 30% you've passed, I know that at Harvard an A is 90%, right? I know that a pass mark is 50%. So in essence, what you're actually telling me is, just hang around here for 13 years. We'll figure out what to do with you when you're done. But we don't really expect much from you. And the contrast, when I was growing up in Zimbabwe, the first thing that everybody would ask me for was my report. So if I saw an uncle and I run to my uncle, Uncle Mike, how are you doing? I haven't seen you in a while. The first words out of his mouth before, how are you, my nephew, is, where's your report? And if you had an answer for any poor performance, except that you didn't work hard enough, no one accepts that. Because in Zimbabwe, the expectation, whether you have a textbook or you don't have a textbook, whether you had to swim across or you didn't have to swim across, whether you didn't have a pen or you had a pen, is that you must pass.
That's about values, though.
Yeah,
it's about values. It's about how.
That's the beginning.
And the issue is that when I was at school, Jamie, things have changed. That was the case when I was at school and probably when you went.
And so we need to
Here
reintroduce
in this
those.
country. But what's changed is our value system has changed. And I think that one of the key differences between Zimbabwe and South Africa, and I don't want to sound like I'm pulling stuff from the past, but Zimbabwe never had apartheid. Okay, apartheid had its own effects. And when it ended, I mean, at the moment, there are scapegoats, okay? There are scapegoats that students run to, that teachers run to. These ones are treated this, what about this, what, So as a result, in the past, when it's not, apartheid was terrible. It wasn't good.
Absolutely.
But what it had done to us as African people is that we felt education is the only way to beat it. We had something to beat. And so there was an anger, there was a vision, there was an agenda, to something to show that we can do it. Now things are open. It's not, it's open. You can go to the school in Sandton. There's tenders here and there. There's some students actually. I mean, I run a foundation that I started, that I fund from my own money, right? And I have students who demand the money. And when I ask, why you say, and they say to me, no, because you get it from government, you must give me. And I'm like, no, so it's a culture of expectation, even from a fellow citizen like me, who's not.
I'm not disagreeing.
And what I'm saying to you is that there's something about the damage that apartheid has done to our mentality, that people have this expectation, welfare mentality, that someone must rescue me because the past has been so bad. So if you are giving scholarships and you run your own foundation, I'm entitled to it.
Okay, so...
And you don't dare ask me questions.
We are almost nearing the end of the show. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each person to put on their table a proposed solution. And it could be looking at a model that has worked elsewhere, or just one aspect of the conversation, because I don't think we could give a solution to the entire problem in one conversation. So Jamie, let me start off with you. I'm going to run our way this way, and then we'll go back to social media. What are you putting on the table?
So I'm putting on the table, first and foremost, an expectation transformation. We can't continue to operate across the board, parents, government, and students, with low expectations. But practically, there are remedies we can find. We can tax Coca-Cola and other big guys, get money for education. But more than that, we need to look at what support are we giving the brilliant students who did make it through the dismal and abysmal basic education system, especially in their first years. Because if they can get through the second year with support, they can make it through the rest of them. The dropout rate is way lower in third and fourth year than it is in first and second year. If the solution is extending the programs for the most vulnerable, so it takes a bit longer, but at least you didn't drop out, you do get the degree, your life is transformed, so you bite the bullet and you take an extra year. But we can't continue, ignoring the issues. But I want to say South Africa is different. In America, we talk about these things on television and politicians feel pressured to do them next week because we'll call them to a front, and the civic population will vote against you if you didn't act on whatever the commentators were talking about. In South Africa, everybody watches TV and listens to the talk radios and nothing changes, We could agree till we're blue in the face, and we need to look at that and say, when we've found answers, are we really committed to implementing them?
Putting pressure on the structures of power. Tammy, what are you putting on the table?
I think we're still, in terms of innovation, in terms of like how we do funding, I think we're still very far behind. I know I said the online thing with the e-books are still not accessible to very many, but there has to be ways in which we cut money. Everyone looks at pay parity between the top 10% earners and the lowest 10% earners, 100 to 1 being South Africa. That's disgraceful that we live in a country where that is happening. So for us, the money is there, but funding it is the issue. I think we need to innovate more. I know the apps are coming up and down, but we need to look at innovation to find the ways that we can, kids don't have to be in school all the time and they can still somehow manage to get that degree.
So looking at innovation as part of the solution, Fetty, how do we get some elements of this problem right?
Just briefly, I think the first thing we need to do, we should get the Minister of Higher Education to release the report that the task team that he has set up in 2012, because that task team has got a report that suggests a model that they're suggesting, okay, and it was led by Derek Swart, Professor Derek Swart of NMMU. I think releasing that will give us direction.
Hear, hear.
Because at least it's got a model and it's thought through.
And the model can be interrogated.
Yes,
doesn't
it can
have
be.
to be
At least we
accepted,
have
right?
something on the table to interrogate, and it was a testing that was set up by him. And secondly, I want to reiterate the changing how we look at bursaries. I think for me that's a quick win. That's something that we don't need to wait for many months to do. It's something that as a nation, or corporates and all, we agree that bursaries are not about just recognition of excellence. They're about need plus recognition of excellence.
I'd like you
And
to
then in that
comment
way-
on values as well. This became a very important part of our conversation. The values of pre-democracy are quite different from the values that young people seem to hold now. How do we reconcile that and still have excellence and progress?
I mean, I think that's something that we've got to inculcate from our schools. I mean, I think that's a broader conversation in churches, in primary schools, and I'm not sure whether you get it in the teaching of a particular subject. I mean, I've just come back from Cuba, despite that it was vacation, but I got engagements. That, you know, there's something about what they teach in history. I mean, when you get to Cuba, it's as if the revolution happened yesterday. Wow. Well, in their talk, not in necessarily what's going on, because the ground is shifting as you're on it. But they teach history. If you're doing, you are at medical school, they're studying to be a doctor, you do history. And there's an agenda there that they have, that they're trying to inculcate. So there's something, whether life orientation was meant to do that, but it's not doing that. We need something, and it shouldn't just be about learners. I mean, it also has to be about teachers. And just to digress, to say, you know, we just had a situation with Penny Sparrow. Yes. And the nation's response to it for me was very sad. And I'm thinking, well, as African people, wouldn't it be great if we said, fine, that's what Penny Sparrow said. Black pride is gonna rise. We're going to make sure that our schools work. We're going to make sure that our streets are clean. I'm a teacher, and I'm going to do such a great job to show that, in fact, children in this township don't have to go to the suburb next door. They can get excellence here. But it's a thing about pride. It's a thing, and so I think we need that kind of consciousness, and we need to we need a movement that does that, rather than the fight with Penny Sparrow on Facebook that continues with the racism, that perpetuates the racism.
You've got 30 seconds.
Oh, God. Right. I think, being a former history teacher myself, I agree. I think one of the things that we're not doing is teaching our young people what South Africa is and what the goals of the country are. Many organizations can name 2, 3, 4 values that they espouse to. What are South Africa's values? What are our goals? We don't know that. Whatever community you go to will give you different answer. Solution? I'm very biased. The Tutuka Bursary Fund has been doing it for 12 years. and for me, I think public-private partnerships and really pulling together in one direction is exactly what this country needs. Because free education, it's not going to come. Somebody has to pay for it. And I think through public-private partnerships, you're able to do both.
Well, what can I say except to say many thanks to my guest. That's to Jamie Mighty. He is the president of the South African University's Debating Council. Tammy Prusent, an activist. Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng, vice principal of research and innovation at the University of South Africa, and Nthatho Silibi, project director at the Tutuka Bursary Fund, also responsible for transformation and growth. I hope that this conversation has somehow contributed to the broader voices that are trying to bring about good progress and change in this country. If you want to be a part of these conversations, all you need to do is follow us at CNBC Africa. Use the hashtag YoungMoney410, and for this particular conversation, we're hashtagging with Ziraiti Fees. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. For myself, Nozi Pombandra, until next time.